Okay, class. So this is just sort of a narrated walkthrough of our blueprint for doing an analysis paper, which is our second essay. And so, again, in keeping with the first blueprint for the narrative essay, you're always going to see three basic parts, right? Your introduction, um, body, and conclusion. But in each kind of assignment that you have, in your classes going forward, each kind of writing, scenario, you will have different things going on in the introduction, body, and conclusion. You'll be doing different kinds of things. So from our essay one narrative, the introduction, we did a teaser. Well, you don't want to do that for an analysis kind of paper, which you'll have a lot of analysis type of papers in Comp 1, in literature, and in other classes. And so that's not what they're expecting. So remember, an analysis is text-based. In other words, you are looking at another work and trying to interpret it. So what's typical for an analysis is this kind of setup. Now, some of this you may recognize, some may be new to you, but I'm just using sort of visuals and examples to help illustrate what you're doing in these kinds of papers. So to begin with, the introduction and analysis should take the form of what I call a meet and greet. You've probably not heard of that before, but think of a meet and greet as kind of like if you're at a mixer or a party and someone pulls you aside and wants to introduce you to somebody else. Okay, when they are introducing you, what is the information that you exchange between you and the new person? Typically, it's your name, right? And maybe one or two things about yourselves that demonstrate how you connect or just to get acquainted and that kind of thing. So, similarly, in a meet and greet introduction for an analysis, it takes a very similar form. It's a very short, to the point, no frills, not fancy introduction. So you are introducing your reader to this work that you are looking at. So you would literally then give us the title, in this case, your film, because that's what we're using as our text. But depending on the assignment that you're given, it could be, a work of literature, a work of art, a song, whatever it is. But you literally begin with giving the title, um, and you'll see in the student sample how that is laid out. Okay, remember to keep the housekeeping rules for how you separate titles from the rest of your work. Okay, usually by italics or using quote marks or underlining, but never all three. And then you would give a basic description of the plot in one or two sentences. I usually tell my students, and this can be literally anything that is true about the film in this case. And, like, in other words, it doesn't have to be specific. It's very general, and it's just literally, um, just a basic introduction. So, in other words, let's say I wrote about the film Zombieland, which came out about a few years ago. So if I would say, in Zombieland, we have a young man that goes by the moniker or name Columbus, who uh, has met up with a group of friends to try to save themselves from a world full of zombies. Now, that is true about the film. That is something that I have not made up. It doesn't really matter if it connects with anything else that you're going to say. That brief sentence that I just gave you is true about the film. That's all I need. So, moving on from the introduction, you'll give the elevator conversation. This is similar to what you have done in the discussion board activity. It's meant to give me a little bit more about the film, but still brief, as if you were on the elevator, just trying to give a quick pitch to a friend about what the film is. And this needs to be more specific than this very general description of the plot in one or two sentences. This needs to be maybe a little bit more, but it definitely needs to tie in with what your eventual point is going to be. So this, in other words, couldn't really work if it was just any old thing that you said about the film, even if it were true about your plot. This needs to be something that's zeroing in on, it's still plot, but it's zeroing in on the eventual point you intend to make in your thesis statement. Okay. So again, you'll see an example in our student sample of how we narrow down here in the middle of our introduction towards something that's beginning to zero in on where we're going as far as our eventual thesis statement. And then finally, um, our thesis statement. So this is where your reader is going, okay, you've introduced me to the title. I know what our film is going to be about. And by the way, students often ask, what if my title of my paper is the film? Well, first of all, I would always suggest that you try to come up with something that's unique and more creative. However, even let's say that you titled your paper, and I'm going to use the film Zombieland as an example, Zombieland. Okay, well, we still need to see that introduction form where the opening is starting out with a meet and greet. In Zombieland, we have blah, 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 blah. You still need to do that, even though it'll feel repetitive. But anyway, so by this point, by the end of the introduction, we've been introduced to the title of the film. We have a general plot overview, and then now you've gone into a little more depth of the plot. That's showing it's still brief, but it's getting basically to a point where the reader, by the end of the introduction, is thinking, okay, so what exactly are you going to be putting forth? What point are you going to be making about this film? Okay. And this is where we land the textual thesis statement. So this is again where I will be seeing that you are going to be comparing and contrasting. It's going to be about a character or characters from the film and whatever it is about them that you're going to examine. So think of your role in this thesis statement like a psychologist or life coach. It is, in other words, you are really peering deep into the character or character's personality, and you're going to put it on display for the reader for them to make sense of what their inner motivations are, what it is. Okay, again, going by our prompts or one of the prompts that you chose. And then that makes room for your body. Now, this is new, and we actually go over this layout in much more detail in our Unit 3 for our final paper. But I wanted to introduce this to you so that you're familiar with it. And think about this acronym C as I think it's a good way to visualize it is if you were going to your boss at your job and you sat in front of your boss and your boss says, okay, so what's the problem? And you were trying to talk to your boss about a coworker that you didn't like. So let's name our coworker Samantha. Okay. You start off with, well, Samantha is loud and obnoxious at her desk. That would be your topic sentence right here. State main idea. Okay. Your boss then, if you say that, your boss might say something like, "Okay, do you have any evidence of that, or what do you mean? Can you go into more detail?" And you would probably say, "Absolutely, I can." And then you give examples or supporting details for what you just claimed about your coworker. Okay? So that would could be endless. You may have a number of complaints about your coworker, right? And then E, the last E, excuse me, for explain. Okay. Now you may have said, well, Samantha chews gum and sits at her desk and it's loud and I can hear it. It's noisy. She rattles paper. She's on her phone. Okay, those are all examples. Your boss might then ask you, okay, so my next door neighbor does the same thing and it doesn't bother me. Why does it bother you? So that would be where this would come in, and you explain why this is a problem, in other words. Okay, and so at that point, you might say, well, maybe that doesn't bother you, but for me, I need to focus on my work, and this gets in the way. These behaviors get in the way of my concentration, and I'm not able to have, clear, um, conversations with my own customers or whatever it is. Okay, that layout for your body paragraphs, which you should have somewhere around 3 or 4 to support your thesis statement. Okay, now think of the body paragraphs as really just taking a magnifying glass to each point of your thesis statement. Okay, whatever that point is about your character that you're trying to make, you'll follow this layout, and it works. It works really well. You want to think about your role in this as like a tour guide. A good tour guide doesn't just point out and identify landmarks to tourists. They explain why the landmark is important and noteworthy, why they should be paying attention to it. Okay, you add your own commentary here in between all of this so that it makes your voice come to the forefront. In other words, this is how you get away from, like we talked about in our other module, getting away from just giving me a plot summary. You use plot, but you're using it with direction to give as examples from the text. Okay, so whatever point you are making about your character, you state that point, okay, and it'll be essentially a restatement from the thesis statement, and then you give examples that support that point, and those examples will come from the film or the text. And then you explain the significance. This is involving your commentary about those examples. And so that's how you avoid just doing a plot summary. And you wash, rinse, repeat for every point of your thesis statement. Okay, this is why I like the C acronym, because it really demonstrates that you're taking a magnifying glass to see each point from your thesis statement that you've made, to see it expanded and bigger, and now you're really spending time and going in detail over it. And then finally, your conclusion, and it's in our conclusions, by the way, conclusions are very similar from essay to essay, from writing assignment to writing assignment. Conclusions usually take very similar forms. Okay, you summarize your thesis statement in this case for the analysis blueprint here. But then it ends in almost always the same kind of ways. Okay, you're always trying to give the reader something deep or deeper, I should say. It doesn't always have to be heavy or anything like that. It can be very lighthearted, but you're trying to give your reader something that could be learned from this, from what you're saying. Okay, make sure you read these. Again, take a look at the student sample. It follows this blueprint very well. In fact, in the student samples, I give you a before and after, where they have given you, just a plot summary. I think the first time it was just a page and a half or something like that, where they really weren't doing an analysis. And then they reworked it. That was more like their rough draft. And then they reworked it towards this blueprint, and it's much, much, much better. Did a very good job. So you'll see how a student applied this blueprint into their rough draft. Okay, so let me know if you have any questions about this blueprint, please.